Let's move next then to the monthly budget report, and we've got Deputy Superintendent Jones at his station. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. For the benefit of new board members, this is a perpetual agenda item, the monthly budget report. I'm required to provide you, the board, my attestation of how financially stable or capable we are. As of this report, I attest that the Utah State Board of Education is able to meet all of their obligations and commitments for the remainder of this fiscal year and for the foreseeable future. I'm not aware of any issues or concerns at this point. However, if there are any that arise, I would notify board leadership right away, and then subsequently you all as board members. Just to really quickly orient everyone to the report, if I think Kelsey's driving, if she could click on the monthly budget report. I just want to ensure that you all recognize that this is not only for you, but is a public-facing document. We are required to do what's called program accounting, and I won't define that or get down into the details of that, but it is very specific and it's very detailed. As you can see, the report is quite large. As you all know, the Utah State Board of Education has several sections within it, and those sections are funded both with, or from multiple funding sources, federal, state, federal mineral lease. I won't go through all of them. The key takeaway from this is that we put this in front of you in the public, and I would encourage all board members to remind their constituents that they can come to you with any questions or concerns at any time, with any program, with any section, with any spending rate that you see on this. As you all know, we're midway through this fiscal year 23. I just did attest to our capabilities of ensuring that we are financially responsible and that you have all of the details, dollar for dollar, what's been programmed, what's been expended so far, and what the remaining balances are that are left by way of this report. Sir, Chair, at this time, I'll pause and take any questions or concerns through you by any of our esteemed board members.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones. Any questions, comments from board members? Okay, thank you very much. That is an information item. We do have one action item within the budget, which is item number 6.2, the discretionary funds report, and we'll entertain any motion related to that report.
Okay, if I may clarify
please.
on this,
Sure.
always we're inclusive of what's your discretionary funds. Real quickly, your discretionary funds account is basically carved out of the budget and the budget report. This money is made available to you as a result of year-end close activities and comes available to you with, what amounts to, by definition, carry forward balances or amounts of money that weren't necessarily expended, but remain non-lapsing or available to you. Typically, it takes state finance until September, so we close in June. It takes state finance, we roll up our year-end closing reports. We update these balances to you around the September timeframe when we get validation from state finance that they agree or concur with remaining balances in these particular fund sources. So we always orient you to the upper right-hand corner. This is where the initial balances and remaining balances across those specific funding sources within your discretionary fund are at on a month-to-month basis. Below that, in the main body of the report, is all of the previous actions the board has taken to basically utilize this funding. Now, as I mentioned earlier in relation to your concerns with the contracts and the funding available to them, if you go back up to the upper right-hand corner, those remaining balances are subject to the legislature sweeping them. Normally, if they do sweep them, we have always got them back. I don't anticipate the legislature sweeping these particular balances of money because we've been able to demonstrate year after year that you as the board take this, process and these discretionary funds seriously, as demonstrated by your commitment to using these funds in these projects. Finally, I did ask that it remain an action item because we don't have any proposals for the use of these funds in this particular agenda item. Later in the Finance Committee report, the Finance Committee is recommending a set aside of the discretionary funds, but we'll wait till we get to that agenda item. I just want to make sure you saw that correspondence between there. So we're not requesting a specific action item. Normally, this is just an information item, but, we just wanted to make sure that there was that correlation between this report and what you will see later stemming from last month's Finance Committee report, especially for the benefit of our new board members on the request for, I believe it's $150,000 for security measures. So as time passes, and you see, it all ties in pretty well. So, sir, Chair, I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or concerns with the discretionary funds report.
Thank you. Board Member Davis and then Board Member Bogus.
Yeah, I don't have concerns with the report, but I just want to throw out while we're on this agenda item that we, three of us, Chair Moss and Member Straight and I, work on the reports and requirements task force, and there's been some talk about having a significant changeover to putting the reporting requirements into Utah grants and some other things. And we visited with Deputy Superintendent Jones, and I just want to give a heads up that there may come out of that at some point a need for discretionary funds to help do that work and or maintain that system. I just want to give a heads up. I'm not making a motion, just a little point of information. So even though we don't see everything on this sheet right now, it doesn't mean that we don't have needs that can be coming up in the future.
Thank you, Member Davis. Member Bogus.
So, Mr. Jones, I just had a question on the anti-bullying contract. We've allocated $300,000 and we've spent $3,000, yet I can't find that contract anywhere.
So that, Chair, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, that contract does exist. My understanding, though, if you want, I can forward it to you.
I would
It
love
was
to look at
approved
it,
in a
please.
previous board meeting, is my
Yeah,
understanding.
it's marked as April 7 of 2022. I just
Yeah,
was not able to
okay.
find that, and I would love to look at it. And
yes, ma'am.
And I don't understand why, and maybe looking at the contract will help me understand, but I don't understand if we've allocated $300,000 and we've only spent the why behind that. I would love to understand that better.
I can get that detail to you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Yep.
Thank you.
I don't have that in front of me right now, but I can certainly follow up.
Thank you, board members, and I'll I'll add to what Chair Davis said. And sorry, Member Davis. Everybody has three hats here, but on that on the reports and requirements task force that Member Davis vice chairs, we've talked about some inefficiencies, some difficulty, and that's something that came up on the fly. And of course, the board will review it. But just by way of example for new board members, these are the kind of things that if you see a need, if you see something where that looks like an item that we might spend some money on, but we don't have it in the budget. The discretionary budget is for those types of items. So those are things that members can bring up. Some of the money is the federal mineral lease money is meant for research and development types of projects, and Deputy Superintendent Jones can provide more about that. But you'll see a couple of buckets up there. So feel free to noodle those ideas around and then bring them forward through the appropriate process, and we can discuss and debate. All right, on this one, I think we're just looking for a motion then to approve the report. Is that correct? Or do we defer?
No, sir, we don't need that motion.
Back to information, wait for finance? Okay, all right.
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
So Chair, with that, that concludes the first two portions of this. Now, I just want to orient the board to the fact that we perpetually provide updates on our status of ARP/ESSER/GEARS funds. And then previous board had directed that once a quarter, we do a more detailed briefing to you, and that will take place now. So Chair, if you'll recognize Sarah Harward and Jessica Kerr for this portion of it, they'll come forward and do the deeper dive, so to speak, on the COVID-19 relief funding, ARP ESSER money.
Yes, please, thank you, and welcome. Can you just introduce yourselves?
Just before, oh, I'm
Member
sorry.
Ware? Go ahead.
Just before you get started, I wanted to know, this isn't an action item, it's just for our information item, right?
It is.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. But we do the deeper, Chair, if I may, we do the deeper dives once a quarter. You'll always see the presentation in the backups, but we do, and we felt that with new board members coming on that, so this is the start of a quarter, January is, so the next deeper dive would be in the next quarter. But you will always see this for your information and status on where we're at with this particular funding. So.
Thank you. Welcome, and can you just introduce yourselves for the new board members?
Thank you, of course. I'm Sarah Harwood. I'm the Grants Compliance Officer here at the State Board of Education.
And my name is Jessica Kerr. I am the CARES Education Specialist.
Yeah, it does fit, it does fit.
It's great. Thank you for the opportunity to present today on the status and update of our COVID-19 relief funding here in Utah for our K through 12 schools. I'm not driving. Sorry. Okay, so in terms of COVID-19 relief funding here in Utah, it refers to both federal and awards we've received from both the federal and state legislatures for our LEAs for our K through 12. And so we present these to you in terms of our oldest award, the ones we received first, to our newest award. So here's an overview of each of those awards, and we're going to go into more depth on them. The other thing we provide an overview is this table, which does have a lot of information on it, but it's each of our awards on the left, the amount that we received for that award, the purpose behind that funding, how it was distributed, how many awards have been distributed to our LEAs, and then the deadline for when that funding must be utilized. So you see there's, subsequent awards with gradually increasing dollar amounts. And so each of those awards, I will call your attention though to the bottom, which does give our total indirect awards to our LEAs, which is over $914 million distributed in over 1,100 grants for them. Okay. Additionally, as far as an overview, when we received these ESSER awards, it was guided that 90% of these awards should go directly to our LEAs. And these were distributed based on our Title I-A funding distribution. And then we have 10% of the award that was in the state reserve. So any LEAs that wouldn't have received an award based on that Title I-A funding, we then gave a base award to make sure all LEAs were able to utilize this funding. And then no more than half of 1% can be used for the administration of this fund. And then anything else in that state reserve was utilized for additional funding to support our LEAs to mitigate COVID-19. And those different projects are approved by the board. I will note that 100% of our COVID-19 relief funds have been obligated, meaning every bit of funding, every dollar, we know where it's going. It has a project, it has a responding to a need. So just something to highlight for you for that. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper. The first one is our CARES, our Round 1 CARES. This is our Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which houses our elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund and our governor's emergency education relief fund, otherwise known as ESSER 1 and GEAR 1. And these funds had to be spent by September 30th, 2022. So you'll note that that has passed, but we still want to update you on that as we're still finalizing everything. So I do have a reimbursement chart to give you a status on where we are on helping our LEAs utilize this funding. So for the ESSER 1 90% award, we had $61 million for this award, and we reimbursed $61 million. You'll note on each of these tables for each of the awards, there's a date as to when this was updated, and that typically aligns with when these slides are due for board backup. So we've reimbursed over 99.9% of that award for the 90%, 97% for the base award, and we did reimburse 98.8% for the Year 1 award. On the bottom, on the bottom, we have these little boxes where we talk about how many LEAs have fully been reimbursed for their award. So LEAs can do as many reimbursements they need of each of the, their funds. They don't have to request it all at once. They can do it, up to monthly. And so for this funding, we like to give you an update on how many have requested that full reimbursement. And so that gives you a number. So, but for ESSER, the 190%, you'll see that 6 LEAs had not been fully reimbursed. They reimbursed they were reimbursed for a portion of their award, but they just didn't end up requesting like the full award. So that's where that's what those statuses are there for you. Okay, the next we do have a graph for you showing really similar information to what we had in the chart, just to give you a visual representation though of where we are at reimbursing those funds. Okay, so we are in the process of concluding the CARES funds, ESSER 1 and GEAR 1, which the grant period ended September 30th of 2022. That was the last day that our LEAs could actually spend the funds, that they could actually, purchase additional PPE or pay for tutoring, that kind of thing. So they did have 45 days after that to send in their last reimbursement request. So that was November 14th. So that was the last that they could do reimbursement requests for these funds. And then our finalized numbers are due to the U.S. Department of Education on like totals and everything January 28th, so later this month. And I just wanted to highlight that LEAs utilize these funds for salaries, paraprofessionals, nurses, and custodial staff, as well as PPE, items for social distancing technology, and classroom supplies. All right, with that, we'll go on to round 2, which is our Coronavirus Relief and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. That one's a bigger one. But this houses our ESSER 2 and our GEAR 2 funding, and we have till September 30th of 2023 to utilize this funding. So later this year, to highlight some key points for you, these funds were awarded in April of 2021, and again, over 90% distributed to our LEAs. When it comes to these grants, they're all reimbursement. And so just to give you a little information, remind you on the process for these funds. When we receive these funds, the LEAs fill out an application, tell us how they're going to plan to spend these funds. So we have that, and they submit it to us so that we can go through and make sure that they follow all the federal guidance. Then we approve those, then they can start doing their reimbursement requests. So we do have an idea of how the LEAs are planning to spend their funds. Should they choose to, if they need to, like revise their plans, they're totally welcome to do that. So that is a process available for them. So analyzing those applications, the most of our LEAs with these ESSER 2 funds planning to spend on accelerated learning, technology, and summer learning and after-school activities. Here's our reimbursement chart for you for these funds. So for the 90% award, we've reimbursed $192 million. For the base, we've reimbursed $2.2 million. And for GEAR 2, $5.4 million. And then again, just letting you know how many of our LEAs at this point have been fully reimbursed. All right, some additional awards from the CRRSA Act. We have our GEAR 2 award, which $11.8 million was allocated to LEAs to serve their students. And then the governor's office did allocate $1.3 million to the University of Utah Reading Clinic. So we do have a new one. This is the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools. In the CARES funds, equitable services for the non-public schools was provided by our LEAs. But the U.S. Department of Education changed it up, and we became the fiscal agent for our non-public schools for these funds. And so we've awarded 22 schools $16 million for these equitable services, where we can reimburse them for PPE and that other things that they need to help them mitigate COVID-19, as well as provide professional services for like tutoring and professional development. All right, round 3. This is our third and final round, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, otherwise known as ARP ESSER and EANS 2. There is no GEAR grant in this funding, and it must be spent by September 30th, 2024. So this one was a little different as far as how the federal government guidance asked us to allocate these funding. So like the others, 90% went straight to our LEAs. Then with the 10% reserve, they asked us, it was in federal guidance that we distribute it 5% of the total award go towards accelerated learning, 1% for after school, 1% for summer learning, again, that half of 1 for state admin, and then 2.5 for any other additional state response. The LEAs also had an additional requirement with this funding that the awards they received, they had to use at least 20% for accelerated learning to mitigate that learning loss. So analyzing their plans again, some were using just 20%, some as much as 80 or 90% of their award on this. So we have an average for you of about 36% of these funds are being spent on accelerated learning. Additionally, funds are being spent on technology, capital improvements like HVAC, and student and community mental health services. Here's our reimbursement chart for you for this funding, with our 90% having $140 million reimbursed, our base $2.3 million, and then our ARP, the summer school, that 1% set aside, we've reimbursed $1.1 million, and the after school, we've reimbursed $975,000. These are a little bit lower because this is the newest award, as well as the most amount of money that they received. It was a large sum, and so they're working on, number one, they're using these funds as efficiently as possible, and they're still, using their ESSER 2 and Gear 2 funding. Additional award from the ARP Act is our ARP EANS or EANS 2. So again, USBE is serving as the fiscal agent. We did have additional requirements when awarding these funds. The schools that did apply for this funding had to meet or exceed 24% of their students coming from households with a low socioeconomic status, as well as we couldn't do any reimbursements for this program. Okay, one more overview chart to give you. So this is an analysis we did of all ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ARP ESSER LEA plans or applications. And what we did here is down the left, you'll see these are the federal allowable use cases that they could categorize their funds at how they were going to spend them. And so what we did is we give you the total number of LEAs that are planning to spend in each use case. So this is number of LEAs. So you'll see that the majority of our LEAs are planning on spending or have spent on technology, addressing pandemic effects on student learning, and cleaning supplies and services. I will just highlight before, if there are any questions, that we do have a COVID page on our USB website that highlights each of the grants, LEA applications. We do have a dashboard for LEA reimbursements, as well as links to all of the guidance, the federal guidance, and the U.S. Department of Education website. With that, Chair, if there are any questions, happy to.
Thank you both. Any questions from board members? I'm seeing, is that Member Wood? I'm still learning how to read the mics. Go ahead, Member Wood.
Just a quick question on slide 16, on the capital improvements. As I recall, there were some limitations from our state government that weren't in the federal alignment. How did we differentiate those and allow that, bypass some of that state?
Yeah, Chair, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, so that SB 1 guidance, that came out for ESSER 2. So that was only specific for ESSER 2, limiting the capital improvements. That guidance we did not receive when our legislator accepted the ARP ESSER. So we didn't have that restriction when it came to the ARP ESSER, which is why you see we're not really using capital improvements for our ESSER 2, and our LEAs are definitely utilizing it for ARP ESSER.
Thank you. So I'll just comment on, by way of background again. This has been riding a tiger for 2.5 years. Sarah Young was involved, Sarah Harward and Jessica. And, you might ask, how hard is it to spend money? Well, it's easy to just throw it around. It's very hard to spend it wisely and responsibly the way our staff have. So, this detail has accumulated over some period of literally drinking from a fire hose, and then another fire hose comes on, and so we just greatly appreciate the wise stewardship over all this money, tracking it, and part of this is you'll see the uses that came out of this. Nobody would have asked for this experiment, but the way that our staff have pumped it out and the LEAs have taken it, we're going to learn a lot from what they did, because they had this money and they said, okay, what do we do with it? And looking at learning loss and addressing specific student groups. So that's the upside is partly great fiscal management. The other side is we're going to learn some great things as this experiment goes on. Do we have a comment? Sorry, Member Klein. I apologize.
That's okay. I just had a question. I think it was the last slide with the horizontal blue bars right there, right? It says addressing pandemic effects on student learning. Can we just get a deeper explanation of what exactly that means?
And that's partly what I was talking about. I know that's a moving target. Things are still in progress. So if you have a response as of today, please.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, that's the accelerated learning and the addressing learning loss. So that can take a lot of different forms. It could be tutoring. It just kind of depends on how the LEA, there's a lot of examples. I'm happy to pull them and send them to you on what those examples look like from our LEAs, but it just depends on how the LEA is really addressing that.
Okay, where would social emotional learning fall in this chart?
Go ahead.
Other than mental.
I know that, yeah, the 6th, is it? There's the mental health services. Sarah, did you want to address? Either Sarah?
Excellent. Chair, if I may.
Welcome. Yes, please.
Thank you. So Sarah Young, Chief of Staff at the Utah State Board of Education. I had the pleasure of working with Sarah, Harward, Jessica, and the rest of the COVID-19 team as part of our pandemic deployment effort. To respond to Board Member Klein's question related to social emotional learning, within the federal guidance related to addressing pandemic effects on student learning, it does speak to not just academic, but also social and emotional impacts that may have occurred. That is part of the category as defined by the U.S. Department of Education. I'll also note it is also called out in the mental health services category in terms of being another type of service that schools may consider related to their use of these funds.
Member Klein, does that answer the question?
So it's included in that second bar, the addressing pandemic effects as well as mental health. Is that correct?
That is
Is that what
correct.
you said?
Seeing nods.
Okay.
All right.
There was something else that jumped out at me. Hang on a second.
Follow up, Member Klein?
Serving specific student groups. Can you elaborate on that?
Chair, if I may.
Please, thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the specific student groups, this is where the U.S. Department of Education clarified that it was feasible for an LEA to choose use cases that may meet a specific student group's need. One example would be special education. So it was possible for them to not just choose a single service that had to be applied to the full community. They had the opportunity to be able to look at individual needs based on some of those federally defined subgroups and be able to use their resources to meet learning needs that may only be specific to those students.
Does that answer the
give us
question,
specific-
Member Klein? Sorry, does that answer the question?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Can you give us a specific breakdown on how it was used for each of the different student groups?
Do we have that at this point? Go ahead, Chief of Staff.
So we do have all of the LEA plans available that may or may not contain that information based on whether or not the LEA chose to use their funds to that for us to be able to provide that forward. It is a wealth of information, but they're all public documents and we're happy to share.
Chair, if I might add.
Thank you, and I'll just note, that has been shared in the past. It's been a moving process, so this would be probably a great time to send out, and members, it's voluminous, but it's a great stash of information. Sarah Harward.
Yeah, I just want to add, so with the federal allowable use cases, they're really long and descriptive. What I've put up here are kind of like summaries, so I can read the full federal allowable use case. It's number 15, which says addressing learning loss among students, including low-income students, children with disabilities, English learners, minorities, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. And it goes into more detail even further than that. So that's the full use case wording from the federal government.
Thank you, and thanks for sending that back out. Member Lear?
I asked this question a few months ago, and I just wanted to confirm that this is still the case. How many LEAs have availed themselves of these funds?
Chair, if I may.
Please.
So it depends on the fund. When it came to the ESSER funds, the ESSER 1, it was like 1 or 2. When I can't remember exactly for ESSER 2. ESSER 1, no one waived. ESSER 2, 1 or 2 waived. I do remember ARP ESSER, we had 8 waive. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So still, I think it's to your credit and the purpose of the funds that they have been benefiting all children in Utah. It sounds like from what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any further comments or questions? Superintendent Dixon, sorry.
Thank you, Chair Moss. I just want to piggyback on your earlier comments, and I appreciate you calling out the Utah way in handling of the funds. As we talk to peers across the country, there are a couple of things of note that I think are important. One is that we've been very transparent from day one about how these funds are being utilized. We have a dashboard so that the public can access, maybe not in detail, but those plans are public as well. So you can see an LEA plan and how they utilize the funds. We have gatekeeping on the front end. So, you might hear some commentary or questioning specifically by some of our congressional delegations saying, funds aren't being used and how are they being used? And we actually have had some of our congressional delegation check in with us. And I'm always really proud to say, let us show you the gatekeeping on the front so that when those plans were submitted, our team of Sarah, and Jessica would look at those plans early on. And if they did not meet the criteria, then we didn't approve the plan. So we had that gatekeeping on the front end through grants management. Grants management is something you'll hear a lot about for new board members, especially if you haven't heard of it, but it's a gatekeeping system for all of our grants. And it really helps us then on the back end when it comes to auditing, we can show how that gatekeeping really keeps us aligned with the criteria for whatever grant, and in this particular case, for the federal dollars. So I hope that provides you with an additional layer of confidence that the gatekeeping on the front end of what gets approved and then how we do that double check before we reimburse really keeps us not only spending the money appropriately, but being able to spend the money, because we then have the opportunity for our LEAs to share with each other how they're using the money and how it's playing out. Now, we still have a wait and see, right, of how is this money making a difference and what was the result? And that will come along. But from that first tranche of money where we turned our basement into a warehouse to get all the protective gear out into schools, to now where we're really seeing with this third tranche of money, our LEAs drilling down and looking at their data and seeing how they can best support students and families with learning loss and other issues. I think that's a testament to the systems that we have in place, the internal controls and the systems in place. So thank you for highlighting that, Chair Moss. I just wanted to punctuate that with a big exclamation mark and a heart.
Thank you, and thank you both for all your work on this. Okay, I think we might be turning, I'm sorry, Member Wood.
Sorry, just one more question. Aside from our, the assessment accountability that we always do, is there any specific assessments or any specific way that you're tracking so at the end we can say this was legitimately due to the excessive funds that were given that this made a difference? Is there anything that you can say, yes, we're doing this differently?
Yeah, Chair, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, so we aren't doing any additional student assessments. We're just going off of our regular ones. We do have an annual report that we provide to the federal government each spring. We'll be completing it shortly here. We've done it so far last year and the year before, and we were just report on the previous fiscal year. And it's more on how LEAs have spent their funds and what categories they're spending in and that kind of thing. But we don't do any additional assessments for this on the students.
Do I see Chair, Member Davis?
Just wanted to note that we do have some information so far, and those of us that went to the Excel and Ed conference, Utah had a 3% overall, but we were the lowest in the country for learning loss during COVID, which I think is a testament to a lot of things, but part of it is to the way that we addressed our learning loss with our funds.
Member Bogus?
Thank you. I'm a little curious about the EANS funds to reimburse non-public schools or to use them. And I can't find the slide that I was looking at initially, and so I do apologize. I'm just wondering how those funds were used and what regulations were attached to those funds.
Chief of Staff Young, I see back in the saddle.
Thank you, Chair. So Chief of Staff Sarah Young, to respond to the question, so there were two sets of guidelines given for EANS. So the very first was specific to the SEA, being USBE, assuming the responsibilities for equitable services. Under the administration, the direction was we had the ability to reimburse costs specific to PPE needs that were necessary at the non-public school level. Those individuals were all administered through Utah Grants Management, and so they follow the same systems of internal controls that we use for our public partners. They submitted receipts, and we were able to reimburse. For the second round, there were two key significant differences in the program. The first was the ability to qualify. They had to be at 24% or higher of serving students in terms of demonstrating a socioeconomic need to be able to then participate in the program. And that second key component was the SEA was no longer allowed to reimburse for any materials. We had to provide those all directly. So the schools said, these are the materials, supplies, and professional services we need. We utilized the Utah State Board of Education procurement process to be able to develop those contracts that then allow us to pay for services that are in alignment with the federal guidelines on behalf of those schools.
Does that answer the question or follow-up?
A follow-up question. So where was it determined that the state was responsible for providing equitable monetary support to private entities?
It was in the federal legislation that was passed for both the CRISA, the second round or tranche of funding, and then as well in the third for ARP EANS 2.
I have one final follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Do you have that bookmarked? Because I'd love to see it.
We're happy to provide you copies of the legislation.
I would love that. It would save me a lot of time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you both. If there are no further questions, it might be time for lunch, unless Deputy Superintendent. No?
Moving legislative to
I'm getting some crossfire, some hungry and some not so hungry. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, what's your take on this? You're up next. You're up next. Do you want to go or break?
I defer to the board. I will go either way.
A thumb up or down vote? Thumb up for lunch? Okay, thumb up for, we're, see one keep going? How many, anybody? Keep going? We're just adding new voting methods from Superintendent Dixon here. I love it. Okay, well, I think maybe we're ready to go forward unless folks are really